I walked into the house, expecting to be greeted with open arms after my long business trip. Instead, the last thing I saw shook me to my core: my wife, Jessica, in a heated conversation, planning my downfall. "Don't worry, he's leaving soon," she whispered, "and then we'll be free." As I stood frozen at the door, my heart pounded, realizing that the woman I had loved and trusted was plotting to get rid of me. I needed answers, but what I uncovered next was more horrifying than I could have imagined. The shock hit me harder than anything I'd ever felt. I had spent the last week in a hotel room, attending meetings, going through my usual routine, always thinking about coming back home to her. But now, standing in the doorway, everything I thought I knew about my marriage was unraveling before my eyes. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Jessica, my wife of 7 years, was talking on the phone, her voice low but full of an unmistakable confidence. She didn't notice me standing there, hearing every word. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Should I walk away and pretend I didn't hear anything? But I couldn't. My body refused to move, frozen in place as I listened to her talk about me as if I wasn't even there. "We'll finally be free," she said, as if getting rid of me was some kind of victory. What was she talking about? "He's leaving soon." The words echoed in my mind. It was like a punch to the gut. Was she planning to make me disappear? Was she planning to leave me while I was away? My thoughts scrambled as I tried to make sense of the words I had just heard. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering if I had heard her wrong. Maybe it was a joke. But no, the way she said it, the way her tone was so sure of itself, it wasn't a joke. I had known things weren't right. She had been distant recently, like I wasn't enough. She'd gone out more than usual, never really telling me where. She always seemed busy, always had an excuse. But this was different. This was deliberate. The person on the other end of the phone was someone she clearly trusted. It wasn't just a fling or a one-night mistake. This was something bigger. This was a plan. I needed to know more. I needed to hear everything. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned forward slightly, trying to stay hidden. Jessica kept talking, her voice cold and calculated. "We'll make sure he leaves, then we can finally be together. I'll make it look like an accident, he won't be around to cause any more problems." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. An accident? What was she talking about? My mind raced, desperately trying to piece together the fragments of the conversation. Who was this person she was planning with? A lover? A friend? Or someone even more dangerous? I felt sick, nauseous at the thought. All the trust, all the love I thought we shared, it was all a lie. Everything had been a lie. And she was already planning her future without me. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to move. I had to confront her. But I didn't. Not yet. I stayed where I was, too stunned, too hurt to do anything. I needed to process what I had just heard. My wife, the woman who had promised me her loyalty, was working against me. And I didn't even know who the enemy was. I wanted to shout at her, demand an explanation, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. I had to know who she was talking to. What kind of betrayal was this? Was it a lover from her past? Someone she had been seeing behind my back? Or was it someone new? I had to find out. I turned around, my head spinning with anger, hurt, and disbelief. I had to gather myself, but I didn't know where to go from here. How could I face her after this? How could I confront her with the knowledge that she had been planning my destruction? I walked slowly to the living room, my thoughts a whirlwind. What was I supposed to do next? How could I make her pay for this? For everything she had done to me? I had no answers yet, but I would find them. I had to. The seconds seemed to stretch into hours as I stood there, caught between the need to confront her and the overwhelming shock of what I had just overheard. My mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and disbelief, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. I couldn't just let this go. I had to face her, to confront Jessica, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, and the weight of the situation crushed down on me like a ton of bricks. I paced the living room, trying to steady my breathing, but it wasn't working. The betrayal echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. "He's leaving soon, and then we'll be free." Those words kept replaying over and over in my head. Who was he? Who was she talking about? And why was she so ready to throw away everything we had built? It wasn't just a momentary lapse, some minor affair. This was a full-on scheme, a calculated move to eliminate me from the picture entirely. My wife had been planning this, maybe for months, maybe longer. It was impossible to wrap my head around. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. I couldn't let her continue without answers, without an explanation. I didn't know what I was going to say or how I was going to say it, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay silent anymore. I walked towards the door of the bedroom. I could hear Jessica still talking, her voice muffled but still full of that same calculated tone. She didn't know I had overheard her. She had no idea that I was about to walk in and shatter her world. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. There she was, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, still talking to whoever had become so important to her. Her face was lit up by the glow of the screen, and for a moment, she looked almost serene, like everything was just fine. Like nothing was wrong. But I knew. I knew everything. Her eyes shot up in shock when she saw me. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in a long time, she looked like she had been caught off guard. The phone slipped from her hand and fell onto the bed, but she didn't pick it up. She just stared at me, wide-eyed, frozen for a moment in time. I didn't speak at first. I just stood there, trying to read her expression, trying to figure out if there was even the smallest ounce of guilt left in her. But there was nothing. Nothing but that same distant look, like she wasn't even bothered by what I had just heard. "I heard everything," I finally said, my voice low but steady. "Everything you said." Her mouth opened as if she was going to speak, but nothing came out. She just stared at me, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape, for some way out of the mess she had created. But there was no way out. Not anymore. "Who was that?" I demanded. "Who were you talking to? What's going on, Jessica? Are you planning to get rid of me?" The silence hung in the air like a suffocating weight. Jessica shifted uncomfortably on the bed, biting her lip. I could see the panic rising in her, but it was quickly replaced by a defensive attitude. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice almost too calm, too rehearsed. "It's not what you think. You misunderstood. It was just a joke, a conversation between friends." A joke. She had the audacity to call it a joke. After everything, she expected me to believe that. "No, Jessica," I said, stepping closer to her, my anger beginning to surface. "That was no joke. You were planning my downfall. You were talking about getting rid of me. How long have you been planning this?" Her eyes shifted again, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to come up with something, anything, to get herself out of this mess. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice wavering slightly now. "You have to understand. I'm just frustrated, okay? You're always away, always working, and I cut her off before she could finish. "No. Don't give me that. This isn't about me being away. This is about you lying to me, planning behind my back. What's going on, Jessica?" She hesitated. Her gaze flickered, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I saw a hint of guilt. But it was fleeting, like a shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I don't know what you want me to say, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. It's complicated. There's someone else. That's when everything changed. Hearing those words come out of her mouth felt like a punch to the gut. Someone else? I repeated, barely able to process what I was hearing. You've been seeing someone else this whole time. Jessica's face crumpled, and I saw the cracks in her facade. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. She didn't care. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, almost sounding sorry for herself, but I wasn't having it. But I'm done, okay? I'm done with you. I can't keep living this life anymore. Her words were like acid in my veins. They burned with the reality of everything she had done, everything she had planned. She wasn't sorry for me. She was sorry for herself, for getting caught. How long? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How long has this been going on? Jessica didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, eyes full of that same coldness, as if I didn't matter anymore. A year, she finally admitted. Maybe more. I felt the world around me crumble. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. She had been with someone else for a year, maybe longer, and I hadn't seen it. I hadn't felt it. The anger in me started to boil over. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was betraying me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had been planning to replace me the entire time. Who is he? I asked, my fists clenched at my sides. Who is he, Jessica? She took a deep breath, but the words didn't come easily. She was trembling now, realizing that there was no way out. I don't want to talk about him. It's over now. I just want to move on. We need to move on. Not until I know who he is, I said. I need to know. She finally spoke, but it was nothing like the words I expected. His name is David. David. That name rang in my ears, but I didn't recognize it. Who was he? Was he someone I knew? I had no idea, but I was going to find out. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The air in the room had become thick with tension. Jessica's words hung there, lingering like an unwelcome guest. David. That name echoed in my mind, repeating itself over and over again. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Why had she chosen him over me? And most importantly, how could she do this to me? To us? The silence stretched on as I stared at Jessica, my eyes searching for any sign of remorse, any sign that this wasn't really happening. But there was nothing. Nothing but cold indifference. It was as if the woman I had married, the woman who had once claimed she loved me, had disappeared, leaving behind a stranger. I don't want to talk about him, she said again, her voice almost pleading now. It's over now. We can move on. I want us to just move on. Move on. Move on from what? She had already made her choice. She had already decided what our future would be, without me. I couldn't understand how she could just throw away everything we had worked for, as if it meant nothing. The anger in me continued to build, but beneath that anger was something much deeper, something more painful. I felt humiliated, betrayed in the worst way possible. I had spent years trusting this woman, giving her everything I had, and she had repaid me with lies and deceit. Don't act like this is some small thing, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. You've been seeing someone else for a year, and you think we can just move on from this? Jessica's face flickered with a moment of guilt, but it was quickly replaced with a defensive stance. She stood up, her body language changing, becoming more closed off. She crossed her arms over her chest, as if trying to protect herself from my words. I'm sorry, she said, but the apology felt empty. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. It just happened. It just happened. Those words, those terrible words, sent a fresh wave of pain crashing over me. How could she say that? How could she make it sound so casual, like it was nothing? It just happened, wasn't an excuse. It wasn't an explanation. It was a way to justify the destruction she had caused, to sweep the whole thing under the rug as if it was no big deal. You didn't know how to tell me? I repeated, my voice growing louder now, the hurt turning into anger. Are you serious? You've been lying to me for a year, sneaking around behind my back, and you didn't know how to tell me? I didn't want to lose you, she replied, her voice shaking now. I love you, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with how things were, and I thought if I could just have both, I could make it work. Have both? She had actually said that. It took everything in me not to laugh, not to break down in disbelief. You thought you could have both? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You thought you could have me and some other guy and everything would be fine? Her face reddened, and for a moment, I saw the real Jessica, the one who had betrayed me, the one who had broken everything between us. But she quickly masked it again, the cold, distant expression creeping back. It wasn't like that, she said quietly. You've been so focused on your work, and I felt alone. I didn't know what else to do. Alone. I couldn't believe my ears. She had used that as an excuse, as if her unhappiness was the reason for her actions. I had been working to provide for us, to build a future, to ensure we had everything we needed, and this is how she repaid me. By betraying me with some guy she met a year ago. I felt a surge of anger rise up inside me. I couldn't stay calm anymore. I couldn't sit here and listen to her try to justify what she had done. My whole life had been turned upside down, and I needed answers. I needed to know everything, even if it broke me. So, you've been seeing David this whole time? I demanded. How did this even start? Was I not enough for you? Was I so busy with my career that you couldn't even talk to me about what you needed? Jessica's face twisted slightly, her eyes welling up with tears. But there was no sympathy from me, not anymore. She had taken everything I had given her, and now she was trying to play the victim. She was trying to make it sound like I was the one who had failed her. It's not like that, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want this. I didn't want to hurt you. But I felt neglected. I felt like I wasn't good enough for you anymore. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger, the betrayal, the helplessness, all of it exploded out of me. You weren't good enough for me. I shouted. You weren't good enough. Do you hear yourself right now? You're the one who's been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you're trying to make it seem like I'm the bad guy. She didn't answer. Instead, she just stood there, her face crumpling as she fought to hold back tears. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I wasn't going to sit here and feel sorry for her. The woman I thought I knew was gone. This wasn't the person I had married. This was a stranger. I don't even recognize you anymore, I said, my voice soft but filled with hurt. I don't know who you are, Jessica. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The reality of what was happening had finally sunk in. Our marriage was over. She had made sure of that. I don't want to do this anymore, I said, my voice trembling. I don't want to be part of this. I can't. You've already made your choice. Jessica didn't say anything. She just stood there, her shoulders slumped, her face wet with tears. But I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. I had nothing left to give her. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. The decision had been made. She had made it for me. And now, I had to face the reality of living without her. But there was still one thing I needed to know, who was David? And what had he done to help her tear our lives apart? I couldn't get her words out of my head. David. That name haunted me, echoing in every corner of my mind. It had been the catalyst, the moment when everything I had known about my marriage shattered into a million pieces. Who was he? What was he to her? How did he slip past my radar for so long? And what exactly had she seen in him that she couldn't find in me anymore? I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't let her get away with this betrayal without knowing everything. I needed to understand the extent of what had happened. What did she see in David? Why wasn't I enough for her? All these questions were gnawing at me, and I couldn't find peace until I had answers. After the confrontation, I walked out of the house, my mind still reeling from the raw emotions that had poured out of me. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, staring at the screen for a long moment before I finally tapped out a message to one of my closest friends, Sean. He knew me better than anyone, and I needed someone to talk to, someone who could offer a perspective that wasn't clouded by the storm of emotions I was drowning in. Sean responded quickly, offering support, as always. But this wasn't about finding comfort. This wasn't about dealing with the pain, at least not right now. I needed to know who this man was. I needed to understand what Jessica had done behind my back. David, I said aloud to myself as I sat in my car, staring out the window. I had no idea where to start. Should I confront Jessica again? Should I go to her family, her friends? But I knew the answer. I needed to dig deeper. I had to figure this out myself. This wasn't something I could leave to anyone else. I pulled my phone from my pocket, and with trembling hands, I began to search. I couldn't just sit there, feeling lost and helpless. I had to take control of this situation. And I was going to start by finding out everything I could about this David. I opened up social media, searching her posts, scrolling through pictures, messages, anything that might give me a clue. It felt invasive, but I didn't care. Jessica had invaded my life in the most unimaginable way, and now I was going to return the favor. I stumbled across a picture, a photo of Jessica, laughing and leaning into a man, his arm casually draped around her. It was taken at some upscale restaurant, a place I recognized but had never been to myself. The caption said, "A night out with my favorite person." My stomach churned. The man in the picture was David. I zoomed in on his face, trying to memorize every detail. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features. His smile was confident, almost smug, and his arm around Jessica was possessive, as if he had every right to be there. The way she looked at him, the intimacy between them, made my blood boil. I felt a sense of fury rising inside me, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. This was the man she had chosen over me. This was the man who had filled the void she claimed I left behind. And now, I was going to make sure I knew everything about him. I didn't stop at the picture. I dug deeper, going through mutual friends, checking out the tags on Jessica's photos, following a trail of crumbs that led me to more information about David. I learned that he was a successful businessman, well known in the city's elite circles. A charming man with a smooth personality, everything I wasn't, it seemed. I felt a rush of anger and self-doubt flood over me. What had I done wrong? Why wasn't I enough for her? I had worked hard for everything we had, but was that not what she wanted? Was it that I had become too consumed with my career? Too focused on providing for us, while she had fallen for a man who seemed to have it all, the looks, the charm, and the confidence that I had never felt I needed to flaunt. I kept scrolling, but then I found something that made my heart stop. A message, buried deep in her conversation history, between Jessica and David. It was a series of texts that made my hands go numb as I read them, one by one. The messages weren't innocent. They weren't playful. They were cold. Calculated. I can't wait for him to leave. I'll make sure it's all set up. Just a few more weeks. The words made my blood run cold. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just about passion or excitement. This was something far darker. She was planning something. Something final. They were conspiring together, plotting how to remove me from their lives once and for all. I leaned back in my seat, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to believe what I was reading. But there it was, in black and white, proof of everything I had feared. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to go straight to Jessica and confront her again. But another part of me felt like I was at a crossroads. I couldn't let her control this anymore. I couldn't let her manipulate me into believing that this was my fault. I was done playing the victim. If she wanted to ruin everything we had, then I was going to fight back. I was going to get my life back, no matter how painful it was. I closed the message thread and sat in silence for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I couldn't let this break me. I had to take control. I needed to see her face again, to confront her with what I knew. But this time, I wasn't going to be the man who stood there and listened. This time, I was going to make her answer for what she had done. David had no idea what he had gotten himself into. I couldn't stop the rush of emotions that crashed over me as I sat there, staring at the screen of my phone. The messages were crystal clear, and every word felt like a punch to my gut. The worst part was how casual they were, as if she had planned this all along, as if this was just another day for Jessica. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been plotting behind my back? Everything about our life together was starting to feel like a carefully constructed illusion. I couldn't just let this slide. No more being passive, no more accepting lies. I was going to confront her again, but this time it was going to be different. She wasn't going to be able to talk her way out of this one. I knew too much now. I knew about David, about the plot, about the way she had carefully crafted a plan to replace me in her life. I took a deep breath, still reeling from everything I had uncovered. It was hard to focus. I wanted to scream. I wanted to make her feel the way she had made me feel. But what good would that do? Anger wouldn't fix anything. It would only make things worse. I needed answers, not just emotional outbursts. As I drove back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't just about the affair. There was more to it. Something deeper. The look on Jessica's face when I confronted her, the way she kept denying everything, the guilt that barely peeked through her defensive walls, it all pointed to something more. I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I took one final breath before stepping out of the car. My heart was racing, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I needed closure. And I wasn't going to get it unless I faced her again. When I walked inside, the house felt different. It wasn't the warm, familiar place I had once come home to. Now it felt like a prison, cold, distant, and empty. The silence that filled the air was suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I found her sitting in the living room, staring out the window. Her posture was rigid, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. She didn't notice me at first, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I walked over to her, standing just a few feet away. The tension between us was palpable, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anger simmering just below the surface. She turned her head slowly, looking up at me with those tired eyes. I could see the weariness in her face, the exhaustion from the lies, but it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't going to let her play the victim. Not now. Not after everything I had learned. "I know everything," I said bluntly. "About David. About what you've been planning." For a moment, her expression flickered. I saw the faintest trace of panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a look of indifference. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her a chance. "Don't bother denying it," I continued. "I've seen the messages. I know you've been planning this for months. You and David, you've been conspiring to get rid of me." Her face tightened, and she stood up quickly, her hands raised in a defensive gesture. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice shaky. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I just needed something different. Different? I asked, incredulous. You think cheating on me, plotting behind my back, is something different? You think this is just some mistake? She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting nervously in front of her. For a moment, I thought she might break down. But the longer she stood there in silence, the clearer it became that she had already made her peace with this. She wasn't sorry. Not truly. I don't know how it got to this point, she whispered. But I couldn't keep pretending. I was alone for so long, even when you were here. I thought if I had someone who could make me feel alive again, maybe things would be different. Alive? I repeated, my voice rising. You think that's what this is? You're throwing away everything for some fleeting moment of excitement. What about us, Jessica? What about our vows? What about the life we built? I don't know anymore, she said softly, almost like she was talking to herself. I don't know what happened to us. I just needed something more. There it was. The cold, cruel truth. She hadn't just been looking for excitement, she had been looking for a way out. A way to escape the life we had built together because she felt trapped in it. I couldn't help the wave of hurt that hit me, deep and visceral. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about the death of everything I had believed in. The life I thought we shared was nothing more than a facade. She had been plotting her escape, and I had been too blind to see it. I know about the plan, I said, my voice quiet but steady. You and David, how you were going to make it look like an accident. You think I wouldn't find out? You think I wouldn't piece it all together? Her eyes widened at that. She took a step back, as if I had struck her. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. I shot back. That's all you've done, Jessica. You've hurt me in ways I never thought possible. You've destroyed everything. And now, you stand there and tell me you didn't want to hurt me? You were planning my destruction. She flinched at the harshness of my words, but I didn't care. She had earned every bit of my anger, every ounce of the fury that boiled within me. I've had enough, I said, taking a step back. I've had enough of the lies, enough of the games. It's over. Jessica didn't say anything. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes devoid of any real emotion. I could see it now, the emptiness that had replaced the woman I once loved. The woman who had loved me, who had promised to stand by my side through thick and thin, was gone. And in her place stood a woman who had no remorse for the damage she had done. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. There was nothing left for me here. I had to move on, even if it meant leaving behind everything I thought I knew. The life I had built with Jessica had been a lie. And now, it was time to face the reality of a future without her. The weight of what had just transpired settled heavily on my chest as I stepped out of the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there, nothing that could undo the destruction Jessica had caused. I had spent the last several years of my life trusting her, loving her, and now I realized how foolish that had been. The foundation of everything I thought we had built had crumbled in an instant. The pain, the betrayal, the realization that my entire world had been a lie, it was all too much to bear. But as I walked away, I also felt a strange sense of relief, a sense of freedom that I hadn't expected. No more lies. No more pretending. No more being stuck in a toxic marriage where the truth was buried beneath layers of deceit. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. But I knew that I couldn't stay in that house, not after everything that had happened. I needed space. I needed time to think, to process everything. So I drove. I didn't care where I went, as long as it was far away from that place. I ended up at a small cafe on the edge of town, sitting by the window, staring out at the world moving on without me. People walked by, talking, laughing, going about their day, and I felt completely disconnected from it all. How had my life gone from the illusion of happiness to this overwhelming sense of emptiness? As I sat there, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, seeing a message from Sean, the friend I had reached out to earlier. I hadn't told him everything, just that Jessica and I had a disagreement. I wasn't ready to dive into the full story yet. But now, looking at the message, I knew I had to talk to him. I needed someone who could help me make sense of this. I quickly typed out a response and set up a time to meet. The cafe wasn't far from his place, and I knew he'd be able to offer the perspective I needed. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by a sense of exhaustion. I was so tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the hurt, tired of trying to hold on to something that was never meant to last. When I arrived at Sean's apartment, he was waiting for me, as usual. Sean was the kind of guy who could read people with a single glance, and I knew that today he would see right through me. There was no way I could hide what had happened. Not this time. Not after everything I had learned. I sat down across from him, and without saying a word, he handed me a drink. We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation heavy between us. "So, what's really going on?" he finally asked, his voice calm but firm. He didn't push, didn't demand an explanation. He knew I would tell him when I was ready. I took a deep breath, feeling the words catch in my throat. But I had to say it. I had to get it out, or I would suffocate in the silence. "Jessica's been cheating on me," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "She's been seeing someone else for over a year. His name is David. And she's been planning to get rid of me." Sean didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, letting the words sink in. He knew I wasn't one to exaggerate or make up stories. If I was saying this, it meant it was true. And I could see the anger flash in his eyes, the same anger that I was feeling deep inside me. But there was something else in his gaze, too. Something more empathetic. He didn't judge me. He didn't make me feel like I was the one at fault. That's messed up, man," he finally said, his voice low. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. No one deserves that kind of betrayal." I looked at him, shaking my head in disbelief. I never saw it coming. I thought we were happy. I thought everything was fine. But it was all a lie. She had this whole plan. She was talking to him about getting rid of me, making it look like an accident, and I didn't even notice. I didn't see the signs. How could I have been so blind? "You're not blind," Sean said firmly, leaning forward. "You trusted her. You loved her. That's not blindness. That's just being human. But you know what? She doesn't get to define you. She doesn't get to break you. You're stronger than this. You'll come out of this, but you have to let yourself heal. You've been through hell, but now it's time to take your power back." His words cut through the fog of my emotions, and for the first time since the confrontation, I felt a flicker of clarity. Sean was right. Jessica's betrayal didn't define me. It didn't take away who I was or what I had built. She might have tried to destroy me, but I wasn't going to let her. "I don't even know where to go from here," I admitted. "I don't know what my life looks like without her. It's like everything I thought I knew is gone." "You start by taking it one day at a time," Sean said. "You need time to process, to grieve, and to figure out what comes next. Don't rush it. You don't owe her anything anymore. Your focus now needs to be on you. On your future." "I don't even know who I am without her," I said, the sadness creeping back into my voice. "You'll figure it out," Sean replied. "And when you do, you'll realize that you're better off without her. You deserve someone who will love and respect you. Someone who won't lie to you, someone who will stand by your side. And that's not Jessica." I nodded slowly, feeling a wave of emotion crash over me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief, sadness, and the overwhelming realization that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet understand. But deep down, I knew Sean was right. I had to let go of the past and take the first steps toward reclaiming my life. I stayed at Sean's for a while, talking things through. It felt good to get it all out, to have someone listen without judgment. But the reality was that this was just the beginning of my journey. The road ahead would be long and painful, but for the first time in days, I felt like there was hope on the horizon. And as I left his apartment later that evening, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Jessica's betrayal define me. I was going to move forward, no matter how difficult it was. I owed it to myself. The days that followed were a blur. Each one felt like a new chapter in a story I had never wanted to be a part of. I was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened, of Jessica's betrayal, of David, and of the life I had spent so long building only to have it come crashing down. But amidst the chaos and the pain, there was a flicker of something else, something I hadn't expected, a sense of clarity. A realization that while my world had been turned upside down, I still had control over how my story would continue. It wasn't easy, though. Every moment seemed to be a battle between the anger I felt toward Jessica and the sadness that consumed me at the thought of losing everything I had ever known. The house, once filled with memories of laughter and love, now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of what had been stolen from me. I couldn't bear to be there for long, so I spent more time at friends' houses or just driving aimlessly, trying to outrun the thoughts that kept chasing me. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't escape the images that flooded my mind. The memory of Jessica's face when I first confronted her, the coldness in her eyes, the way she seemed so willing to throw away everything we had built, it all haunted me. And then there was David, the man who had taken her from me. The thought of them together, laughing, sharing moments that should have been mine, it made my blood boil. But amidst all this, I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep torturing myself with what could have been. I needed to move forward. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had no choice. I couldn't stay stuck in this place of pain forever. I had made the decision to start the process of moving on, even though it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. The first step was removing myself from the situation, physically and emotionally. I didn't want to go back to the house. I didn't want to keep seeing reminders of a life that was no longer mine. So, I started the process of looking for a new place. A fresh start. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. The days were filled with appointments to find a new apartment, and the nights were spent sorting through my things, packing up memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Every time I touched something that had once felt so familiar, our shared books, our photos, the little trinkets we had collected together, I felt a pang of sadness. But I kept telling myself that this was the only way. This was the only way to heal. To start fresh. It was strange, really. The pain and the sadness were still there, lingering just beneath the surface, but there was something else, too. A small spark of hope. A sense of possibility. It was hard to feel it at first, but over time, I began to realize that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something new. Something I had to create for myself. The process of finding a new place was grueling, but it was also cathartic. Each step, each new decision, brought me closer to the person I wanted to become. I didn't need Jessica to define me. I didn't need her to make me feel whole. I could do this on my own. When I finally found a place, a small but cozy apartment on the edge of town, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And that was enough. It was a fresh start, a place where I could heal, a place where I could begin to rebuild. The first night I spent in the new apartment was the hardest. It was quiet. Too quiet. The silence felt suffocating. But at the same time, it was exactly what I needed. It gave me space to think, to process, and to reflect on everything that had happened. I couldn't keep running from the pain, but I also couldn't let it control me. I had to find a way to live with it, to let it shape me into someone stronger. Over the next few weeks, things started to settle. The pain of losing Jessica began to feel less sharp, less consuming. I started focusing on myself again. I began picking up the hobbies I had neglected for years, the things I used to love but had pushed aside in favor of focusing on my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had lost touch with over the years, and began building a support system that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I still had my bad days, of course. Days when the anger flared up again, or when the sadness threatened to pull me back down. But those moments became fewer and farther between. I was learning to stand on my own 2 feet, to rely on myself rather than someone else. And slowly but surely, I was starting to rebuild my life. One day, I got a call from Sean. He had been checking in on me regularly, making sure I was doing okay. He could see the progress I was making, even when I couldn't. We talked about everything and nothing, and in that moment, I realized just how much I had grown. "You're doing good, man," Sean said, his voice filled with encouragement. "You're stronger than you think. You've come a long way in a short amount of time. Don't forget that." His words hit me in a way that I hadn't expected. It was a reminder that, despite everything, I was moving forward. I was making progress. And that, in itself, was something to be proud of. I still didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would hold. But I knew this: I had survived. And I would keep surviving, one day at a time. The road ahead would be long, and the scars of the past would always be there, but I was learning to live with them. To carry them with me as I moved forward, into a future that was mine to create. It was hard to let go of the person I thought I would be with forever. But in the process, I discovered a version of myself I hadn't known existed, a version that was strong, resilient, and capable of standing on his own. And as I stood in my new apartment, looking out the window at the life I was building, I realized that this was just the beginning. It wasn't the life I had planned. But it was the life I was going to create for myself. And that was enough. The days began to stretch into weeks, and with each passing day, I found myself embracing the uncertainty of it all. The overwhelming grief that had once consumed me slowly transformed into a quiet strength. I had been broken, yes, but I was learning how to rebuild myself from the ground up. It wasn't easy, nothing about this journey had been, but I knew that I was on a path that, no matter how painful, would lead me somewhere better. Somewhere more honest. The apartment had become my sanctuary, a place where I could truly reflect on who I was becoming. Every piece of furniture, every personal touch, reminded me that I was creating a space for myself, one that was free from the lies of my past, free from the manipulation, the betrayal. It was a daily process, slowly but surely filling the emptiness with something new. At times, I would look around the apartment, and a wave of sadness would wash over me. The life I had imagined for myself had been so drastically different. I had once believed that Jessica and I would grow old together, build a family, and live the life we had promised each other. The realization that none of that would happen still cut deep. But rather than let it consume me, I used that sadness as a catalyst for growth. I refused to let her betrayal define the rest of my life. I refused to be a victim of circumstance. It was during these moments of reflection that I started to understand something crucial: my value didn't come from who I had loved or who had loved me. It didn't come from the relationship I thought I would have. My value came from within, my integrity, my resilience, my ability to keep moving forward no matter how many times life knocked me down. I wasn't perfect, but I was learning to accept that. I was learning to accept my flaws, my mistakes, and my humanity. And in doing so, I was allowing myself to heal. As the weeks went on, I began to focus on things I had neglected during my marriage: things that had once been passions but had fallen to the wayside in favor of maintaining a life that was no longer real. I had always enjoyed writing but had stopped doing it when life became consumed with responsibilities. Now, I found myself journaling every night, pouring out my thoughts onto paper. It became my outlet for everything, my anger, my confusion, my hopes, my fears. It wasn't a way to erase the past, but it was a way to make sense of it. Writing allowed me to channel the chaos into something tangible, something I could control. I also returned to the gym. I hadn't realized how much I had stopped taking care of myself until I started again. The physical activity wasn't just about getting in shape, it was about reclaiming my body and my mind. Every workout felt like a small victory. Every drop of sweat reminded me that I was still capable of pushing myself, still capable of growth. Despite the progress, there were still days when the pain resurfaced, uninvited but impossible to ignore. There were moments when I would drive past the places Jessica and I used to go, and the memories would flood back. The laughter, the inside jokes, the dreams we had shared, it was hard to let go of the idea of her, of what we had. But every time the pain crept in, I reminded myself that it wasn't real anymore. It was a version of my life that had been taken away, and I couldn't keep living in that shadow. The real test came when Jessica reached out again. It had been over a month since I had last spoken to her, and I had hoped that would be the last time. I had blocked her number, but she found a way to contact me through email. At first, I didn't want to open it. I knew what it would be, a string of apologies, guilt, and maybe even more manipulation. But something inside me told me that I couldn't avoid it forever. If I was going to truly move forward, I needed to face this head-on. The subject line read, "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I clicked open the email, and the words poured out. She was sorry for everything. She admitted that what she had done was unforgivable. She claimed she had been confused, that she had made mistakes, and that she was hoping we could somehow find a way to make things right. She wanted to meet in person, to talk about the future. I stared at the screen, reading the email over and over again, feeling the sting of her words but also the distance that had grown between us. For a moment, a part of me wanted to reach out, to ask her the questions that had been gnawing at me for so long. Why had she done this? Why had she betrayed me so thoroughly, so completely? What had happened to the woman I thought I knew? But then I thought about everything I had learned since that moment of discovery. I thought about how far I had come, how much stronger I was now. And I realized that her apologies, her words, would never be enough to undo the damage she had caused. There was no going back to the person I had been. I wasn't the same person anymore. And I didn't want to be. I closed the email without responding. I didn't need to meet her. I didn't need closure from her. I had already closed that chapter of my life. It wasn't easy. It wasn't painless. But it was the right thing to do. That night, I went for a run. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The weight of Jessica's betrayal was still with me, but it didn't feel as heavy as it had before. I had learned to live with it, to accept it as part of my journey, but it no longer had the power to control me. I was writing my own story now, and it was up to me to decide where it went from here. The next day, I made the decision to continue building my new life. I signed up for a creative writing course I had been thinking about for months, something I had always wanted to do but never had the courage to pursue. I reached out to old friends who had faded into the background during my marriage. I focused on my career, taking on new projects and setting goals that excited me. The future felt uncertain, but it also felt full of possibility. And as the months passed, I began to see the fruits of my efforts. I was starting to feel like myself again. The pain was still there, but it didn't define me. I was more than the man Jessica had betrayed. I was more than the life I had lost. I had learned to let go. And in doing so, I had found the strength to move forward. The road ahead would not be without its challenges. There would still be days when I would miss what could have been. But I was no longer afraid of the future. I was no longer afraid to face the unknown. Because now, I knew I could handle whatever came my way.